Yes, we do need to reach the nations. We need to see people come to faith in Jesus. Churches need to be planted. But if we leave those nations, and lots of nations come into my mind right now, nations like Rwanda, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Paraguay, United States even, if we leave those nations in lawlessness, injustice, tyranny of different kinds, we fall short.
Hi, friends. Welcome back to Ideas Have Consequences, the official podcast of the Disciple Nations Alliance. The goal of this show is to share with you the power of truth to transform nations. And to do that, we examine how our mission as Christians is to not only spread the gospel around the world to all the nations, which of course is extremely important, but we also are called to go beyond that because our mission also includes being the hands and feet of God to transform the nations, to increasingly reflect His truth, goodness, and beauty to the world. Tragically, most of the church has largely neglected this second part of our mission, and today, many Christians have little influence on their surrounding cultures and nations. Join us on this podcast as we rediscover what it means for each of us to disciple the nations and to create Christ-honoring cultures that reflect the character of the living God. My name's Luke Allen. I'm the producer of this show, and today I am joined by our usual host, acting co-host today, and my dad, Scott Allen. Hey, Dad.
Hey, Luke.
Thanks for joining us, and as well as my colleague, co-host, and good friend, Tim Williams. Hey, Tim.
Great to be here.
Yeah, this is fun. We are all really fired up today because we are coming off of the DNA equivalent of a Camp High or a Jesus High, because we just got back from the Disciple Nations Alliance's global forum down in Panama City, Panama last week. We all just flew back a couple of days ago, so we're still just feel very encouraged, filled up, and just really excited for the work that we have ahead of us here at the DNA because of just such an encouraging time that we were able to spend with our DNA global family last week. It was such a fun time. We had 4 days together. There was, I think, over 100 people there, and just every day filled with amazing conversations, with worship, with tons of teachings, with stories of what God's doing in and through the DNA around the world. So we wanted to share with you guys a little bit about the week for anyone who wasn't able to be there. And also we just wanted to thank anyone who was down there with us for joining us. I know it's not easy to fly that far for so many people. It's expensive and it takes a lot of time. So we're just super thankful and blessed that each one of you guys who were down there spent the time with us. So today we just wanted to share with you guys a little bit of our personal takeaways from the forum and give you guys a little bit of behind the scenes on the week. For anyone who couldn't make it, Dad, would you just share a little bit about just what these forums are, what they look like, who comes to these, and your takeaways from the week?
Sure. Thanks, Luke. Yeah. So the DNA's Global Forum, it's something we do approximately every 3 years. I think there was a few times we did it every other year. But it's about every 3 years. It's something that we move around the world. Typically, we will do it somewhere in Africa, somewhere in the United States. We've done them in Asia, and in recent years, we've been doing them more in Latin America, just because, as we did this time in Panama, because right now, for whatever reasons, God's reasons, there's just a lot of interest in the DNA's teaching and training in the Spanish-speaking world. And so the forum is a time where people that, I call it the family time, and it's where people that are heavily invested in the mission of the DNA have gone through our training, and in many cases, or most cases, people go beyond that. They're training others. They have integrated the DNA's kind of core training into the training that their organizations are using. These are often church leaders, organization leaders. It can be anyone. So if you've never, let me just mention this, if you've never been to a DNA Global Forum, the first step is to go through Coram Deo, our core training, and you can get that by going online to coramdeo.com, and you'll find our core training, basics course number 1 and number 2. Go through that, and then once you do that, you begin to put it into practice, and we've got ways that you can do that. That puts you into a category of engagement with the DNA that we call kingdomizers, and the forum is really a gathering of kingdomizers from around the world. So we would love to have you come. If you haven't, it's an incredible time of really the purpose of it is just learning. What is God doing? It's learning from each other. How have you put this into practice? What's really exciting? What's working well? Sharing kind of models of ministry, hearing from good teachers, really excellent teachers on topics that relate to the DNA. So we encourage each other, learn from each other. It's a time to just kind of really grow the ministry exponentially through connection with one another. Luke, Tim, do you guys want to add anything to that in terms of what the forum is?
Yeah, I mean, how many forums have we done at this point? It's been
I should know that number, honestly.
Maybe 12, 15?
Oh, no, probably more than that. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I would say it's up into the 20s now, so yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what's fun is a lot of times when people kind of, join the DNA family in a way, have these ideas really impact them, is it changes your life. It really does. It changes the way you see the world, obviously, because it's worldview. Mm-hmm. But with that, a lot of the people that come to these have been coming for years and years and years, and it's kind of like a family reunion in that way. The guy I spent the first dinner with the first night, Demlish from Ethiopia, he's been a part of the DNA since, I think he said 1999. So right after I was born, and he's committed, and he just comes back every year. So he's seen me grow up, and now it's fun to talk ideas with him now that I understand them too. So it's fun just having such a history, and because of that history, it's fun to hear the stories of how over almost 30 years now, God's just worked through the DNA and through all of these trainers around the world, each of us in our own settings, in our own lanes, in our own communities and nations. And at this point, the seeds that were planted in the 90s have really started to grow, and it's so cool to hear those types of stories of impact where it's years and years of God's faithfulness. Also, just coming away from last week, let's just do a couple roundtable questions for everyone listening. The first one, just overall highlight, that one takeaway you're coming away from last week. I guess I can go first. My overall highlight was just, like I just said, it was the meals. It was the opportunity to sit down, and the meals themselves, the food was awesome. But
your highlight was the food.
The highlight was the food. After that, I was good.
It was good food.
It was really good food. Mm-hmm. It was amazing. Come to the forums. There's great food. Mm-hmm. But no, the food was good. But what I was doing while eating the food, the conversations that I had with people were super encouraging. For us, just coming out of the DNA headquarters, we call it up here in the U.S., a lot of times you can feel a little bit isolated, especially now that we're working remote, just, every day pouring into this ministry. And sometimes there's a disconnect between what we're doing and the actual boots on the ground work being done in other nations. So for me, I'm just always so curious to have the opportunity to just sit down face to face and hear about, what is God doing in and through you and your life. And you've been affected by the DNA's teaching and just the power of biblical worldview. What is that looking like? And, how's that being played out in Paraguay or Ethiopia or, wherever these people are coming from? It's that to me is super encouraging. And it almost feels like a small slice of heaven, because that's exactly what I want to do when I get to heaven, is just ask people about their lives and the way God worked through them in their time and their place. So that was my overall takeaway coming away from it. What about you guys?
I think for me, Luke, my overall highlight from the forum, it's hard to answer that question because there was a lot of highlights, but actually, it was a session, and I know that's a question you want to ask later. What session stood out to you? So I'm going to answer. Both of these questions in one answer. My highlight from the forum was a session that was led. It was a workshop by a woman from Paraguay named Luisa, and she was talking about what has happened in Paraguay since the first Vision Conference was done there. The DNA's core training was done at a live Vision Conference in Paraguay. I think this was about 15 years ago. And I was stunned by all the ripples and the influence that had come out of that one Vision Conference that I wasn't aware of. She herself was a key person involved in that follow-up. She had a career in civil service. She was actually a police officer at the federal level in Paraguay. Just really wonderful person, very, very organized as well. But some of the things that I learned was that from her in this session was, here's just a few highlights that kind of really stood out to me. They formed a network. These are the people that organized that first Vision Conference, followed up the Vision Conference by organizing a network. And the mission of the network was to integrate and empower local churches to fulfill the great agenda of God and be transforming agents through integral discipleship in all spheres of society. They actually had a strategy. They divided up Paraguay into zones with the goal of, in each of those zones, having a network in the zones with the specific goal of reaching the pastors and the churches in that zone. And the consequence of all that over the years is that, I don't think there's hardly a church in that nation that hasn't been exposed to the training. They continue to use the Coram Deo online Spanish version to kind of spread the training and get it out. They have replicated the live vision conferences by training trainers, so they have trained trainers now in Paraguay. We end those vision conferences and our core training with encouraging churches to kind of collectively do what we call seed projects, do strategic actions that are aimed at discipling nations. Luisa said they have literally hundreds of stories of seed projects that are being done all over Paraguay. And in addition, she mentioned that they've done retreats for young people in Paraguay. They have reading groups. They have brought in a really close DNA partner, Work for a Living, and so they have a Work for a Living strategy working in impoverished communities to train people not only in biblical worldview but in job skills training. They have a database. They have a database of all the people that have been, kind of connected through, and they have a communication strategy. A couple other things, and I'll pass it off to you. They actually work with a group called let me see if I can get this correct here. It's called ICEP, which stands for the Association Iglesias Evangelicals Paraguay. That's the Association of Evangelicals Churches in Paraguay. Many nations have these kinds of associations of evangelical churches. This is the main one for the nation of Paraguay. And they work so closely with that network essentially has made the DNA's core training their mission. And that just kind of blew my mind. So they've adopted completely this strategy for all evangelical churches in Paraguay. I think another thing that really stood out to me is that not only are they spreading and following up and doing so much to disciple the nations. One of the young ladies that was there at the forum is a part of this network. She's got her law degree, and now she's working at very high levels in the area of law in Paraguay in order to bring alignment between the legal systems and structures in that nation and a biblical worldview. That's just one example. But one other thing was they actually, part of that network includes some very wealthy individuals in Paraguay, Mennonites who in that country have been very prosperous. And now those people are their local funders for the movement. And it brought to my mind, my research on the Clapham sect in England and how the Clapham sect, had a clear strategy for discipling England, but it included bankers like Henry Thornton, really wealthy people that gave their money for the cause. And I just was really stunned by the fact that they had cultivated the local resources to fund the work. So they're not coming to the United States or Europe. They've cultivated the resources. And if you know anything about Paraguay, it's one of the poorest nations in South America, actually. So it's not something you would expect. It's not Brazil or Argentina. This is a quite impoverished country, but they're completely locally funded. I could go on, but that was just hearing that blew my mind. I was incredibly grateful. I was shocked I didn't know it. And I can't wait to kind of write this up. So
yeah. Speaking of which, we hopefully will have that in story form for you guys soon. We also, coming away from the forum, Tim and I had the opportunity while there to sit down for a few podcasts while there and interview a couple of people that came to the forum. So we're going to be sharing those interviews with you here on the podcast over the next few weeks as bonus episodes. And one of the people that we interviewed was the person Dad was just talking about there. Her name's Yasmin. She is a lawyer from Paraguay, and she is applying a biblical worldview very directly into the laws that are being passed in Paraguay. So that was a fascinating little interview that Tim and I had the opportunity to do, and you can keep an eye out for here on Ideas Have Consequences. So stay tuned. Tim, what about you?
Yeah. That interview with Yasmin was definitely a highlight. Just hearing how God orchestrated her vocation. And, that's something that we like to talk about a lot too, is just how, God has his people where he wants them. Much of the problem is they're not being his people where they are, so it's not about being his people on a Sunday morning only, or, during church services. God wants his people in the school system. He wants his people in government. He wants his people, taking care of the family, all of the different places in the marketplace. And so, she had a career that was just very instrumental in international relations and law. And then she got a job offer, and she started working for like someone who was kind of like a retired Supreme Court justice, and all of these bills were coming through, and she's evaluating these policies and looking for things that were coming in subtly that were totally against a biblical worldview, and they don't just come right out and tell you, we want to introduce these terrible laws. They just kind of, it gets very gray. So she had the opportunity to work in that field and to just very discerningly detect these and kind of alert policymakers about what's in them so that they could be aware. One of my favorite interviews that we had the chance to do was with a couple of guys from Nicaragua, and they are at a place called the Nehemiah Center, which exists because of work that DNA did, and it was fun to see them. And they approached Ken Ekstrom as they came up on that first night and was like, "Hey, you don't know us, but 30 years ago you came and did a biblical worldview conference, and we're still doing ministry the way we do it, and with the direction and impact and connection as a result of that vision conference from 30 years ago." And just a profound ministry, really focused on in that area. Many pastors are just kind of sent to lead a church if they're literate, and they're maybe one of the only ones that kind of, here's a Bible you can read, like go lead a church. And so this Nehemiah Center's working with like more than 80 pastors, just trying to get them trained, help them really understand what is the mission of church, what is the mission of God, how can you be a pastor well, how should you care about your community.
Hi friends, I wanted to take a quick minute to tell you about the Kingdomizer Training Program, which is the DNA's most popular biblical worldview training course. It's available in 7 languages, and it's completely for free. And it's not one of those courses that's going to take you months to complete. In fact, most people finish the entire Kingdomizer 101 course in about 7 hours total. These courses were created to help Christians live out their mandate to make disciples of all nations, starting with themselves and working out from there. I would recommend this course to any Christian who wants to stop living in a sacred secular divide that limits their faith to only some areas of life and start living coram Deo, which means before the face of God, in all areas of your life. This course is great for individual study, or it can be used by a small group or in a church class. We've had many churches use this course as a discipleship resource over the years. And by the way, as a quick heads up, we actually just began our next rendition of this course, so stay tuned as that will be coming out in the next year-ish. To sign up today for the Kingdomizer training program, head over to coramdeo.com and begin to have an impact for Christ on your culture. That, if it's anything like mine, is in desperate need for truth and direction right now. Again, to sign up, head over to coramdeo.com or tap the link in the show notes.
And there's a second part of their story that really stands out to me just because it's just incredible. A lot of times to kind of something you said earlier, Luke, we'll hear, okay, I did the training, right? And so that's kind of like day 0, right? Like, what's going to happen now? What's going to happen after the training? And to find out, okay, like this training led someone to work with an unreached people group whose culture was filled with thievery and poverty, and they didn't know Christ, and to live in there, trying to help them come to know the gospel. And then over the course of 8 years, continuing to teach and live and embody a biblical worldview. And now they, see, I understand now based on the Bible, personal property rights. I, respect my neighbor. I work diligently. And it's been a totally transformed society. Took, an 8 years of time, but the people all the way through say DNA and its teaching was really an important part of the influence that's been here. So again, stay tuned. We'll have that full interview for you guys here in the next few weeks as a bonus episode, and you can learn a little bit more about what Tim is sharing there. As far as there was a bunch of, the whole thing was sessions. Essentially, most of the days were filled up with sessions. We got to hear from a bunch of amazing speakers and hear these types of stories, and then also just trainings and encouragement from people around the world. Out of all those sessions, guys, obviously, I think I enjoyed everyone I went to. I did enjoy everyone I went to, but some of them stuck out. You just like, oh, that really was helpful for me, that piece of information that person shared. Dad, did you go to a session where you had that kind of that takeaway? I know you were just sharing about Louisa, but did you have another one that you're going to take something away from and apply it into your life this week or this year?
Well, yeah, I mean, there was some really great, really powerful sessions, as you said. There's just one thing that really stood out to me for some reason, I think just depend kind of where I was at the moment. But it was something that Ina Richardson, who's the founder and president of Work for a Living, the ministry I mentioned earlier, she was there, she spoke, and she actually quoted Land to Cope, and I thought it was very profound. I wrote it down. She said, we fall short, we being the church, we fall short when we reach the nations, and yet we leave them in poverty, tyranny, lawlessness, and injustice. And again, it spoke so powerfully to our ministry. It's, yes, we do need to reach the nations. We need to see people come to faith in Jesus. Churches need to be planted. But if we leave those nations, and lots of nations come into my mind right now, nations like Rwanda, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Paraguay, United States even, if we leave those nations in lawlessness, injustice, tyranny of different kinds, we fall short. We fall short. I just thought that was very powerful.
Yeah, I took a picture of that quote too. That was her whole talk was really helpful. But just that importance on the fuller understanding of discipleship. It goes beyond Bible study. It goes beyond the gospel of salvation, and it should have an effect on societies.
Right. And again, it doesn't mean that those societies are going to be somehow perfect. There's going to be no perfect society on this side of Jesus' return. But if we don't care enough that we leave them in the condition that they're in, these nations, and if they're struggling with poverty, injustice, corruption, we fall short. It needs to make a difference, not just at the personal level, but at the family, community, and national level as well.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of the countries represented there last week are perfect examples of this, if not, I mean, the U.S. as well.
Yes.
So many of these countries in North America, South America, Central America, the countries themselves, most of them, the majority of the population is Christian when they take those polls. Some of the countries, it's north of 90% of the country says they're Christians, and yet we still see just corruption, poverty,
a lot of violence,
a lot of government corruption.
Right.
And you don't look at the country exactly and say, oh, that's a thriving Christian nation, even though it's majority Christian. So there's a drop off there. Why? Why? So it's a big reason the DNA exists.
That's right.
So it was encouraging to meet the people that were like us, excited about changing that. Tim, what about you, sessions wise?
Yeah, I could talk about a number of sessions. One that stands out was our very last session, and with our co-founder Bob Moffett. Bob just, he has a wisdom and a kindness about him that people just experience. It's profound. There's a weight to his words. There's an unhurriedness about the things that he says. And there's a clarity in that. And he kind of got us started, and it's funny, we have a sign, a DNA sign, a transforming, community or something. He's standing in front of the sign, and he doesn't even realize the sign's behind him saying this, and he's like, you know what? Our job is not transformation. And everybody in the room's kind of like, where is he going? What is he thinking about? We're about transformation. What do you mean? Our job's not transformation. And as he went on through the conversation, he just talked about, the job of transformation is too great for humans. Like, this is God's reality. Transformation is God's work. And, so transformation's not our response. It's not in our hands. There's so many factors. There's so much human brokenness. There's so many layers to be considered. He said, we've got a calling. We have a responsibility. Our responsibility is discipleship. We disciple. We teach people to obey all the teaching and all the biblical teaching, the teaching of Christ, the principles of the Bible. That's our job.
Tim, not to... But I thought what Bob said, I agree 100% with the idea that if you somehow think it's up to you, then you're off base biblically. That these are any kind of transformation at the level of a nation or the world, even smaller than that, honestly, your family. I mean, there's just so much that we are utterly dependent on God for, and He is the one that does the work. And at the end of the day, we give Him all the praise and the glory because we can't. But the idea of saying, and again, I want to be a little careful in what I say here, but it's only discipleship. I just shared what Louisa was doing in Paraguay, the strategy, or I think of people like the Clapham sect in England. It went beyond personal discipleship. And I just want to make sure we leave space for that too.
Yeah, so. I think that's a great interjection, and it really ties into the story I was telling earlier about the unreached people group. I mean, the reality is that transformation did come through the faithful work of people by God's grace, But it's easy to be overwhelmed by thinking that it's our responsibility or something that we can control, and maybe just kind of scaling back just a little bit and having the vision, right?
Yeah.
And trusting God with the responsibility.
Yeah, I think there's a message for people that feel the weight of trying to bring about the change, and they need to hear the message that you need to be faithful and trust in God. He'll bring about the good fruit, and that's a very it takes a load off people's shoulders. But then there's another message for people who feel like, it's all up to God, and I just need to trust in Him and be kind of very faithful in my very little sphere, of my own life, and maybe, discipling a friend or two. And anything beyond that is really entirely up to God, and I don't need to engage in it. And I think those people need to be challenged as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun to hear, Bob's strategy of he's really big into what he calls micro groups and discipleship, and he's in his 80s now, and he has 15 of these, discipleship micro groups that he's doing, and there's a requirement built into that like within a week's time, the person that he's working with needs to be doing a micro discipleship group with someone else, and so he's got a strategy for multiplying disciples, may God give each of us, the calling and strategy that we need to be part of His transforming work.
Yep. Yeah, I enjoyed that session as well, Tim. Bob's, I think Bob was just trying to address a room full of people that wanted to change the world, and to remind them that God's in control here, and God's at the end of the day the one that actually brings the transformation. But like you were saying, Dad, I am. I think a lot of Christians, maybe it's just in the U.S., a lot of Christians have way too small of an idea of what they can, of what their life can do in bringing about transformation. I mean, again, the theme of this podcast is the power of truth to transform. Truth transforms, guys. Biblical truth brings about biblical flourishing. And are we the ones that bring the flourishing? Nope, that's God. But we can still bring the biblical truth to the table and then see what God does with it.
That's right.
Every day in wherever we're at, in our work, in our families, in our communities, that's our role, is to continue to disciple the nations in a way that we hope will bring transformation, and that's the goal. So I enjoyed that talk. It was a great just reminder of our role as believers in the Great Commission. One of my favorite talks also was brought to us by Juan Valdez. He's a partner of the DNA. He trains at a lot of the DNA conferences down in Latin America. He's from Miami, Florida. He's a pastor there and works with a apologetics group. He's actually going to be on the podcast soon, guys, so we're excited to share him and his wisdom with you guys. But he at the forum gave, I think it was the second session, and his session was all about truth and truth's relationship with freedom on society. And I just had so many helpful takeaways from that. The way he explained it, I think, as an apologist, gave me new words and a new view on the relationship to truth and freedom. One thing that I think was really helpful for me specifically is when he was talking about how when you understand truth, it's like, in my mind, the analogy that came to my mind was it's like standing on a rock amidst a sea of raging water. And as long as you're standing on that, you know what is right and wrong. You know what God's morality looks like. You understand the way God created the world and how we should live in it. You understand what true human rights are. You understand truth. I mean, that rock represents truth, right? And so, and as long as you're on the rock, you're free, because you're free to live in the way God created you to live. So you can move around the rock. There's a lot of freedom there, but you don't fall into the chaos of thinking that freedom is jumping off of truth and leaving truth and jumping into the raging sea. When you do that, that's what people nowadays think is true, or freedom. That's not freedom. That's what we call that license. That's it's really a rejection of freedom. You left the freedom behind, essentially. Now you're just in chaos, and you think you just are, good to go. No, you're not. You can't find anywhere else to land. That's the problem with leaving truth behind, is people think they can go find their truth or build their own truth or find a different truth, like another religion that might make sense of this world. Nope. It's just raging seas. It's just chaos. And
confusion is a word he kept using. Confusion and chaos when we abandon
it really is. Yeah. And to me, I thought, as Christians, when we get into these debates around what is moral, what are human rights, what's right and wrong, what's evil, what's good, is as Christians, we all agree on those things. There's a lot of unity there. And when you look out at the world, all these people swimming around in this raging sea trying to find those things like good and morality, is they never know where to land. So there's such disunity. So when people come to Christians attacking us for, you don't know what morality is, you don't know what good is, we don't have to get defensive and think we need to present our argument in perfect, form. We're standing on the rock. What we can do to you is very easily point out that you're not coming from a place of authority here, and you have nowhere to land. You have nowhere to back up your arguments. Not to mention, you can't even find anyone else you agree with out there, because there's nowhere to land. So everyone else is just moving around. He gave the example of abortion, pro-life, pro-choice arguments that I thought was perfect in this. Most Christians have a very, I wish we had a clearer, but we should have a very clear idea of what is right and wrong when it comes to abortion. Have the same understanding of what it means to be human, have the same understanding of when human life begins, have the same understanding of who gives life, who takes it away. Whereas when you look out at the world, they can't ever land. They have no idea where to draw the line, essentially, of what's right and wrong when it comes to that argument. So they're all over the map, and instead of getting defensive, I think as Christians we can just point out the obvious elephant in the room, which is you don't have any moral standing here, any moral ground. And it kind of switched in my mind the way I go about these types of discussions. Is you should really just dive down into what is truth right away, and try to help the person that's disagreeing with you land on that, and point out to them, if you can't land on that, then you can't really present an argument to me.
Yeah, Luke, I couldn't agree with you more.
So it was just a helpful format for me, a helpful framework for how to talk about those things. Yeah, go ahead, Ed.
Well, just the power of truth. I think at the end of the day, you can say something like discipling nations is just to to the best ability that God gives us, understanding the truth, speaking the truth, and living in the truth. And that's how nations become discipled.
Yep.
You talk about firm like a rock, and it's the actual Hebrew word for truth is emet, which means literally rock. And I thought that was really fascinating, but it's the idea that it's fixed, it's immovable, and it's unchanging. In other words, it begins with God. He spoke all things into existence. God never changes. His word never changes. And so that's the fixed, immovable nature of what's true. It will prevail. In the end, people say, well, the truth will come out. The truth will prevail. Well, that's true because God exists, and that truth that he spoke about human nature and when life begins and everything else, that's fixed, firm, immovable. So you said it just right there.
Yeah, that was a fun takeaway for me. As far as takeaways, guys, again, from the week, any more takeaways before we get into our last questions here? I know I have some.
Go ahead, Luke. Yeah.
One for me was Tim and I had a fun time on the last day walking around with a little microphone doing just kind of man on the street interviews and getting a couple highlights from people. One of the questions we were asking is, when you first went through the DNA's training, what was your number one takeaway from that? A lot of times we call it the aha moment, the moment that biblical worldview makes sense. Like, oh, wow. Because to me, it was really a light bulb moment. A lot of people describe it that way as, whoa, what was that training? What was the wording that stuck out to you? And it was so interesting for me as the producer of this podcast to hear the vast majority of people's response to that question was one line: ideas have consequences.
That'd be a good name for a podcast.
Yeah, wouldn't it? I know. Yeah, maybe we should name a podcast. And it's that simple idea. I remember Mom used to tell us that growing up all the time. Ideas have consequences. And when you look at history, when you look at cultures, when you look at the advancement of ideologies that promote lies in countries that tear them down, it's ideas having consequences. And the only way us as Christians can live in societies that are free and flourishing and present God's goodness, truth, and beauty is for God's true, good, and beautiful ideas to be rooted in that culture, so that the consequences that affect people's lives, that affect their children, that affect their schools, that affect their law, is for those God's ideas to be rooted in a culture. And if it's not God's ideas rooted in that culture, it's going to be someone else's ideas. Therefore, it's going to be unbiblical ideas, and therefore it's going to be ideas that tear down, destroy, and dehumanize. And that teaching is just so powerful. Just that one line, ideas have consequences, is so profound. And it was interesting to hear how many people, for them, that simple concept was the aha moment that really made biblical worldview and just the importance of understanding worldview come alive to them for the first time. Any other highlights, guys?
I think it was Ina again in her session. She brought up Proverbs 14:34. It's a passage or a verse that I know, but when she spoke it, it really spoke to my heart again. It goes like this: righteousness makes a nation great. Righteousness makes a nation great. And I thought, it's not the size of the nation, it's manpower, it's military, it's money. These aren't the things that make a nation great. It's righteousness. And so to me, there was something that I thought was so just beautiful and practical about that. What is it? It leads you to the question, what is it in my community that is unrighteous, let's say unjust, evil, that is, when it comes to ideas having consequences, is destroying lives, harming people. What's going to make my community, my nation great is righteousness. And then what can I do to, God, what are you calling me to do to bring about righteousness in the face of this specific thing that's unrighteous? So I just really love that. And, again, maybe it's because in the United States, Trump's motto, "Make America Great Again," is so embedded now in the culture, it leads to the question, well, what makes America great or any nation great? And the Bible answers that very specifically. It's righteousness.
I really enjoyed that talk. I always enjoy Ina. She's going to be coming on the podcast too soon, guys, so stay tuned. Guys, the theme of the week, the theme of this year's forum was the essential role of the local church in discipling nations. I kept that theme as best as I could at the forefront of my mind throughout the week, trying to answer that big question of what is the essential role of the local church in discipling nations. I feel like I got a little clarity on that from the talks. I just want to hear from you guys as you were thinking about that theme throughout a lot of the talks. The talks were kind of framed roughly around that theme. What did you guys learn about that, about the local church's role?
One of the things that stands out to me, Richard Nelson came and gave a talk, and he said churches do what the government cannot do, and he talked about a variety of things. So that was kind of one point that he made, and then another, in terms of
just on that, Tim, before you go off of that, because I think it's really profound, and you're raising the question: what is that churches do that governments can't do? You want to answer that question?
You talk to me. What do you have in mind? Yeah.
I remember a pastor at one of the churches that we worked with very closely for many years in Uganda answered that question. The church, Watoto Church, really influential church in Uganda. And he put it this way. He said, government can do a lot, but it can't love.
Yeah, that's well said.
The role of the local church is to come alongside people and to express kind of in kind of an incarnational way, again, the hands and the feet of Christ, to love people. Governments can do things in the area of justice and in policy, and those can be incredibly important, but it can't love people. I thought that was a good answer. Yeah.
Yeah, well said. As I thought about it, it's like, government, we can assign tasks and do this and kind of do it in some kind of structured, non-loving way, right? Where we just we're trying to be helpful, but the church is empowered by love. But yeah, another thing that he said that really stood out to me, people sometimes ask, like, well, how... Or I've seen churches that they don't want to address social issues, right? It's just a hot topic. They've got congregants on either side of it. They're concerned, And Richard just put it this way. He said, if we don't address it directly, kind of at the forefront, at the front door, it's gonna show up in broken lives of people coming to our church later on. You're not going to be able to avoid responding to these social issues. You will respond. It's just a matter of, can you do it now where you can guide people and guard and protect them and help them know and understand, what's true and leads to flourishing? Or are you going to leave them to kind of sort through these lies on their own and make mistakes and reap the consequences of it? He said,
that was
deal
a great
with the
moment,
issues.
Tim. You're right.
Yeah,
that was really powerful.
Do the hard work of dealing with it up front.
Yeah. It was fun having Richard down there at the forum. He works for a policy center in Kentucky. We'll actually have an episode with him coming out next week here on the show. But he came down and talked from the U.S. perspective on politics, about the engagement of Christians in politics. And it's so interesting when you come to these forums is so often I think in the U.S. we think all of our, battling over ideas and ideologies here in the States, whether it's Marxism or feminism or climate change extremism, is like a localized issue here in the U.S., all these culture war topics. It's like, nope, these are global conversations. If you go to Argentina or Chile or Kenya, they're having the exact same conversations today. So talking about Christians' engagement in politics is really a global question right now. So it was fun hearing, just discouraging and also interesting hearing how global these conversations are and how we as global believers are all kind of on the same page of, wow, we need to do something now. There's some dangerous ideologies at play in the world and things are shifting fast. So what can we do? And just having those conversations with people from all over the world was really helpful. It gave me a lot of perspective as a U.S. citizen who's also thinking about these things. But just hearing the same thoughts coming from people in different contexts. For me, I guess, on the question of the local church's role in discipling nations, there was a talk that Alejandro Moreno gave that was helpful for me. It was a long talk. He covered a lot, but one of my takeaways was just the importance of, as Christians, knowing that our role in churches is always changing. So don't get caught in get stuck in the motions, and kind of a wake up call to Christians who just go to church every week, and go to their Bible studies and serve in church, all super important things. But as Christians, like, always be ready to be used by God in discipling your nation. And what that's going to look like is different every year. So have flexibility, be prepared, be ready, work with other people in your church to always be just pushing against that constant pull, I think, of getting caught in the motions and stuck in the motions, because I don't know. I feel like in the church bubble, that is such a common occurrence. I know for myself, I definitely do that way too often. And yet when we think about words like discipleship, that's a word that requires a process to it. We're never going to be fully discipled. So you always are going to be changing. When we think about transformation, again, we talked about that earlier. No Christian is going to be fully transformed into the likeness of Jesus. Only Jesus was like that. So it's a process. It's an upstream type of process. We're always, our whole lives, going to be paddling against this. So just understanding that, and as best as possible inside of our local churches, being ready and being prepared to be used by God in whatever the new season presents was a good reminder for me. And yeah, just a good wake-up call. So I guess we're wrapping up. We're getting low on time here, guys. But as far as anyone who wants to hear a little bit more about those couple interviews that Tim and I had a chance to do, we'll just be releasing those here on the podcast soon. Again, for everyone who was able to join us last week down in Panama, thank you so much for your time. We really enjoyed having you guys there. I hope, like us, you're pulling away some takeaways that you can be applying into your lives, your communities, and your nations as we continue to disciple the nations and hopefully be used by God in that process of discipling our nations. And for anyone who wasn't there, like we said at the beginning, we would love to see you at our next DNA Forum whenever that happens. We don't have a date yet, but we are already thinking about it. So we'd love to see you there. Again, just an encouragement. If you are curious about what this training is we're talking about, the DNA's training is called the Coram Deo training courses. The first one of those is the Kingdomizer 101 course. And it really just lays out what a worldview is, why there's only one worldview that works, and why that's the biblical worldview, and how you can begin your process of discipleship in a biblical worldview. If you'd like to check out that course, I'll have that linked in the show notes below. And I guess that's it for today, guys. Tim, Dad, thank you so much for joining. I really enjoyed this discussion. And for everyone listening, thanks again for tuning in to another episode here on Ideas Have Consequences.